Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Since Monday was Memorial Day, I thought we would do a patriotic song today. So you should have those words in front of you. We're going to do My Country 'Tis of Thee, but we're going to do it in Spanish.
Good luck with that.
No.
I don't see the word.
Miss Louise, if you'll start us. My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrims ride, from every mountain side, let freedom breathe. Let music swell the breeze, and bring from all the trees sweet freedom song. Let mortal tongues awake, let all that breathe partake, let rocks their silence break, the sound prolonged. Our fathers God today, author of liberty, to thee we sing. Long may our land be bright with freedom's holy light. Protect us by thy might, great God, our King. Good, and welcome Rudy.
Y'all sang with that.
Yes, we did.
Can't
Do it
imagine.
again.
I told Rudy he was leading today, but he didn't believe me. So.
I wanted to make sure that wasn't the case.
That's right. That's right. His attention a little late. That's right. So I was going to wait until we filled all 96 seats today. It's set up for the funeral tomorrow. That's why there's extra tables and extra chairs. And the question today also goes with the song we just did. Okay. So what is the national anthem? Just everybody yell it out.
Star Spangled Banner.
Only one person knows. Star Spangled Banner.
Oh, I win the prize!
Yeah, that's not the prize. But prior to that, this song was the national anthem. But can you tell me what year Star Spangled Banner became the national anthem? Any guesses? Raise your hand.
1776.
No.
That's good.
Don't go back that far.
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
Rudy?
1933?
No, but you were very close. Angel? Angela?
1925.
Nope.
1932.
No.
35.
No.
30. We're playing with those 30s.
Donna?
33.
No, that was said. Rudy?
37.
Just 31. Yeah, he got the closest. I'll give it to him. 1931 is what the Star Spangled Banner.
So what is the song?
Before Star
It
Spangled
was Star Spangled Banner became the national anthem in 1931. The one we just did, My Country 'Tis of Thee, was the song before.
Okay.
Information.
So you have all this information, why did they switch?
Because they liked the other song better.
Good answer.
Oh, my, that was not a good answer. It's the best one he had though, right?
Because I got great stuff.
Yeah.
All right, Donna, it's all you.
Yes, yes, yeah. Try to do more research next time.
Okay.
Tough crowd.
Yeah. We want details.
Oh,
He will get you.
Yeah,
that should
just don't put it here. Yeah, I know, sorry.
I made
I'm
people.
gonna sound rough today.
Oh,
That's impressive.
If I can hear you now.
What voice did I give my husband? When he needs to do something.
That's trouble.
Okay. A blonde really got tired of all blonde jokes and decided to hang herself in the bathroom. As she locked the door, she yelled at her husband, "I'm hanging myself because I'm tired of jokes about us blondes being stupid." Her husband broke into the bathroom, saw his wife with a rope tied on her toe. Her husband said, "I thought you were hanging yourself." She said, "Yes, I am." The husband replied, "Usually when people hang themselves, they put a rope around their necks, so why is yours tied on your toe?" She said, "Well, I tried that, but I couldn't breathe." Okay. They were in, have you ever left your keys in the car? Like,
Oh, my.
you know,
Yes.
all that kind of stuff.
Do we have to
Really,
admit to that?
us women really have to tell our husbands that, "You gotta come get me because my keys locked in the car." But anyway, says they weren't in my pocket, she said. Suddenly I realized I must have left it in the car. Frantically, I headed for the parking lot. My husband had scolded me many times for leaving my keys in the car ignition. He's afraid that the car could be stolen. As I looked around in the parking lot, I realized he was right. The parking lot was empty. I immediately called the police. I gave them my location, confessed that I had left my keys in the car, and that it had been stolen. Then I made this most difficult call of all to my husband. She had to call her husband and tell him, "I left my keys in the car and it's been stolen." There was a moment of silence. I thought the call had been disconnected, but then I heard his voice. "Are you kidding me?" he barked. "I dropped you off." Now it was my turn to be silent. Embarrassed, I said, "Well, come and get me." He, again, very grumpy, he said, "I will just as soon as I convince the cop that I didn't steal your blonde car." Okay. King David was told he'd be a king around age 12. For 20 more years, he worked in the fields as a shepherd. He wasn't appointed king until he was in his 30s. God had to move lives around, shake nations, remove royalties, and prepare Israel before David could fulfill his destiny. You have to know, and it seems like it's taking too long, and you won't give up. God is moving, shaking, and placing people everywhere just for you. It's not just that it will happen, it is happening.
Very nice.
It's funny how God works in mysterious ways. I'm going through all this stuff, and it's like, oh, this is about David.
There's one on David, and it's good timing too. As you were talking about David fulfilling his destiny, and I thought about that. And oftentimes you think, well, David's destiny was to be king of Israel and to rule in a very important time with God's people. But when you think of like the grand scheme of all of time since creation, I think the bigger destiny, the biggest influence David has had was not just over Israel, but over you and me by the example of his life that we've been studying. And so we're just one class amongst hundreds and thousands over the years since David's life has been recorded. And it's that cautionary tale of his life as well. As you've seen, we've kind of dug into a lot of the really dark parts of David's life, not just before he took the throne, but even after he took the throne as a result of his own decisions or indecisions. David had to face some very difficult, and we're going to see more of that today, though we're going to try and take a little bit more of a positive approach to it, because it's been dark for a bit now as we've been going through David's life. And so I think, though, that it's important for us to notice that the kind of thing that we oftentimes are after when it comes to destiny and what God's trying to do with us, I think we become short-sighted sometimes in just looking at what's right there in front of us. When God may be using us to impact people that we may not ever meet or we have yet to meet by some of the things that may happen to us today. Whether or not we get locked out of our car, things like that, and how we respond to that. Those are all things that we can get lost in the moment and forget about the long-term legacy and impact of our lives. And so, as I've been working on Miss Jill's service for tomorrow, day by day, she would have all the troubles of the day come upon her. I got to get ready for this thing. Got to try to make it to this thing on time. All that kind of stuff that you can run into in a day's time. And just get so stressed out about where you are in the moment that you forget about how much of an impact you've had over people over years. And she's certainly one of those that has had that. I know in my life, and I know for many of y'all who've known her much longer than me, her positivity, her energy, her zeal for loving people, encouraging people, those are all things that will not go away in a day-by-day circumstance. And so you're living those types of stories as well. And David lived the life that he lived, went through the struggles that he went, not just for himself, not just for the Israelites, but also for you and I to be able to have a better life by looking at the wisdom that can be gained by watching his and learning vicariously through his good times, his bad times. So we're still kind of at the tail end of the bad times that David has been having with conflict with his family and such, and we're going to see that taking place in a real way with the conspiracy with his own son, Absalom. And we got a lot of ground to cover. We only have about 4 weeks or so left in studying David's life. And this is probably, we're going to be doing a lot more reading on this lesson than we will in the last 4 lessons that go from here. So we're going to try and cover 2 Samuel 15 all the way through 19. Most of it we're going to spend in chapter 15. But all of this is centered around, or centered on the conspiracy that David's son Absalom has to try and take the throne from David. So let's quickly review David's situation. Personally, David is awash with guilt. He's dealing with the consequences of his choices, the loss of his son born to Uriah, the first child, not Uriah, born to Bathsheba, Uriah's wife before he died, as a result of David's decision to put him in the front lines of battle. So he's dealing with that. He's also dealing with how things are now affecting his family. And it was around Miss Joyce, but I don't think it was Miss Joyce this time. Wow, we get to pick on other people now. Isn't that fun, Miss Joyce? I love it. Yeah. So if you're watching online, we had another cell phone moment. And we've grown to enjoy those now. Those are just the fun things that we can, fun little breaks from the seriousness. So, David, personally awash with guilt, kind of like how you feel sometimes when the cell phone goes off in the crowd. You're like, oh, it's not me, is it? Everybody checks real quick. I'm going to check mine real quick. Okay. Domestically, David's home was shattered, right? The relationships that, or lack of relationships that exist between David's children are an obvious example of that. So he's got personal issues, domestic issues. He's also got political issues. He's lost respect as a leader. You're going to see how this shapes up. Almost very similar to what had happened between David and Saul. Saul, though, reacted very differently than David ends up reacting in this situation. Different situation because, David's not necessarily the son of Saul. He was very close to Saul, but Saul became paranoid. You don't see as much of that with David. So let's dig into the conspiracy and how he reacts to it. It's in 2 Samuel 15. We're going to read through much of that chapter together. Okay, so starting in verse 1, if you'd like to turn there or flip to that spot on your phone with me, we're going to be NIV. 2 Samuel 15:1. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper. There's no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, if only I were appointed judge in the land. Then everyone who has a complaint or a case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice. What is Absalom doing right now? What's that? Promotion, right? He's doing politics. All right? Looks like he's campaigning, doesn't it? He's got his entourage, and then he's looking for disaffected people in the kingdom. And so as David finds people who are upset with whatever the political situation is and how it's affecting them, he's trying to stir that animosity up a little bit more and say, Absalom says to the person, hey, if there was somebody who could represent you. And of course he's offering himself like that. So it looks like he's running for office, he's being deceptive in what he's doing as well by pretending to have a level of power that he doesn't actually have yet. Continuing in verse 5, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. While your servant was living in Geshur Aram, I made this vow. If the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron. The king said to him, go in peace, so he went to Hebron. He's talking to David, right? This is the very person he's conspiring against. He's lying to him for the reasons that he wants to travel. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, as soon as you hear the sound of trumpets, then say, Absalom is king in Hebron. 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. Okay? If you remember, we ended up last time talking about how Absalom was already sleeping with David's concubines. This was one of those ways in those times to show strength over someone who was currently in power. It began with that. David doesn't react. He probably is aware of what happened, but he doesn't seem to be reacting in such a way, like he should have with a father to a son in this situation. And so as he lets that go, Absalom continues with this conspiracy. It takes 4 years. So he's behaving in this way for all of this time, and then gradually, this isn't a sudden thing, right? Gradually, you have the opinion of all of these people throughout the kingdom of Israel turning towards Absalom and away from David, and David is just seemingly just ignoring and too comfortable in the power that he has at this point. And so Absalom then comes up with this plot where he is able to then claim the throne from this distant place, Hebron, and he's got these people gathering with him. So little by little, he's undermining David's reputation, and he's building his own reputation, and then this big move happens. Verse 13, a messenger came and told David, the hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom. So this is like the biblical political polls. You know what I do? What you hear when they talk about people polling about favor towards a president, things like that. Well, they polled the people, and everybody's for Absalom and not necessarily for David anymore. Then David said to all of his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword. The king's officials answered him, your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses. The king set out with his entire household following him, but he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. A lot of change in David at this point, right? You can see that. Now he's reacting to the situation. So just picture David scrambling around. He's throwing a few things in his bag. He's getting ready to run from his own son. And so after all of these years, he's running for his own life again. And then you want to see and notice the people that actually go with him. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. So, you're not able to just see with these words the emotion that David must have felt as he's leaving this city that God had provided him. And he feels like in his mind he's saving people's lives by avoiding this conflict, or maybe he's just running in fear. David needed some affirmation. He was still most likely feeling abandoned by God and by others, his own family.
Oh, are these blanks?
Abandoned is a blank. Yeah, we finally got to some blanks. He's feeling abandoned, most likely. Even after Nathan confronted him, absolved him of his guilt, and talked about the consequences of it, and the sword never leaving his household. Even after the pronunciation of his forgiveness, you are forgiven by God, David's still most likely carrying some guilt that's affecting his decisions. So God gives David not one, but 5 friends.
Oh.
5 friends that go along with him as he leaves and begins running for his life again later now in his life. And these names are so amazing, I put them in all caps. I thought they were great. These are, if I ever have a boy, you got some ideas here.
Zadok.
Ittai the Gittite. I like that. Ittai the Gittite. All right, here's verse 17. The king set out with all the people following him, and they halted at the edge of the city. All his men marched past him, along with the Kerethites, Pelethites, and all 600 Gittites who had accompanied him from Gath marched before the king. All right, so these are still the mighty men that were with him previously. The king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why should you come along with us? Go back and stay with King Absalom. You're a foreigner and exile from your homeland." So this is the first time that this person is mentioned. And it's like he's got this entourage of people that are still faithful to him. Certainly not the number of people that were his fans when he was at the height of his rule as a king. But these are the people who have stayed faithful to him in some of the worst times of his life. And he stops at kind of like the last house on the way out, and this man Ittai, really who doesn't have a whole lot of limelight so far in David's story, steps up for him. And what's amazing about that is that this man is a Gittite himself. A Gittite is a man who is from Gath. Does that name sound familiar? What is Gath? That's Goliath's hometown. This was the place where David was public enemy number 1 for a period of time. If you remember when he was running for his life from Saul, he tried to hide in Gath, and they would not even let he tried to even act crazy while he was hiding there, so they would allow him to at least stay in that town. And even in that embarrassing state, they wouldn't let him stay there very long. So that just goes to show how far-reaching David's influence was and how much it changed since those early days with David. So this man was willing to follow David even into this situation. So David encourages Ittai to back out of what he's about to get himself into. Verse 20 says, "You came only yesterday, and today shall I make you wander about with us when I do not know where I'm going?" Right? So this isn't a man who's been there from the beginning. He's come in this last phase of the worst of David's popularity and saying, "Hey, I want to follow you." And David's encouraging him not to do that. He says, "Go back, take your people with you. May the Lord show you kindness and faithfulness." But Ittai replied to the king, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, wherever it means life or death, there will your servant be." So this person who was likely once a faraway enemy is now this close friend. And it's amazing that he's gaining this friend who seems to be a new relationship with him so late in his life. It's almost like a godsend. That there are still people who can look to David and say, "You're worth me following in this way." So that's who Ittai was to David. And you'll find that in your life, maybe you've seen this a few times, where you've been kind of in your lowest state, some new relationships can form, even in those very dark periods in your life where you're struggling the most. Maybe they're new relationships, or maybe there's one that you've always kind of been acquaintances with, and it's that circumstance that has brought you in their path, and they have become such a source of strength for you in some of the times in your life where you need people the most. So God does this, and He's doing this for David's life, not just with Ittai, but also with a couple more, Zadok and Abiathar. I don't know how to pronounce those, but that sounds about right. Zadok and Abiathar, verse 23, the whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. Okay, so still a lot of people are mourning what's happening. The king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the wilderness. Zadok was there too, and all the Levites who were there with him were carrying the ark of the covenant of God. They set down the ark of God, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until all the people had finished leaving the city. So these guys are Levite priests that carry the ark. And then they put the ark down. They wait for David to tell them what he wants them to do from there. So verse 25, king says to Zadok, take the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it in his dwelling place again. But if he says, I'm not pleased with you, then I'm ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, do you understand? Go back to the city with my blessing. Take your son Ahimaaz with you, and also Abiathar's son Jonathan. You and Abiathar return with your 2 sons. I will wait at the fords in the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar took the ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. So these guys, these are God's men. They have the ark of the covenant, and if you'll remember, wherever the ark was, success happened. God's blessing took place on those people. But David doesn't just presume that the ark should come along with him. Still, he's in this state of contrition. So David in his contrite heart, that's a blank, contrite heart, is willing to accept God's will, whatever happens, whether it be life or death. This is what a contrite heart is. It's a willingness to accept anything that comes as a result of one's bad decision, right? So he's not making any demands of God. He's not presuming anything from him. And so David, in doing this, you can see the difference here between he and how Saul approached his circumstance. Saul was rejected by God for silly decisions that he made as a king. But he was trying so hard to cling and grasp onto his power instead of healthy respect of God through what was happening to him. David sees the circumstances around him, and he's thinking, I'm not going to try and change this for my betterment. I'm just going to follow where God's leading me and hope for the best, right? So there's a total difference in the approach to the change that's happening. So David reveals a true understanding of the connection between the ark and God's people. He still has a respect for the importance of the ark's presence with the Israelites, not just with David as the king. The ark, A-R-K, and God's people. He knows that it's not a guarantee of God's blessing if it's taken out of its proper place. It can be a curse, right? He knows that it's also a symbol of God's authority over a nation. So it doesn't matter who the king is, it's actually God's presence among those people and their obedience to him that is the true success of a nation. So he understands this intuitively. He knows that God can make a king out of anybody he wants to make a king. So you have these priests even saying, this is like the person who is kind of the expert on God things with David saying, hey, we're willing to go with you, but you make the choice. And David makes this choice. And so that's for them to listen to David and do what he says. That's what a friend would do, right? To help David meant going back to the city and trusting David's wisdom still. So if they are faithful to David, and everybody's kind of aware of this, it's going to be out there, and David says, stay in Jerusalem, and Absalom's the one who's trying to take over the kingdom, what's that do for them? Puts them in danger, doesn't it? But they're willing to take that risk for David as God's people, as God's priests, in order to ensure that the ark stays where it belongs. So David is more interested in God's presence among his people in the ark than he is even his own welfare, or even the welfare of the priests who may be in danger in the situation. And the priests go along with it because they have a healthy respect for David and what God wants them to do. Okay, continues. Here's someone else, Hushai.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Can you look back at verse 23? We both had NIV, but you said they moved on toward the wilderness, and my NIV says the desert.
Yeah.
And to me, desert and wilderness are two totally different things.
Yeah, you get the same thing throughout Exodus too. You know, you'll hear references to God's people wandering through the desert and wandering through the wilderness. And a lot of that, the word is interchangeable, right? So it's a barren, an uncultivated land, essentially.
Okay.
But that can mean sand or it can mean trees.
Okay.
And so there's confusion as to what the climate was like and things like that, even in the time of the Israelites traveling through the wilderness. Because, that kind of stuff has changed over the years. But yeah, that's why. It's an interchangeable word. So depending on the translator, they may pull it one way or the other. So 2 Samuel 15:30, we meet the fourth of David's friends that show up here. David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot. What do you think David's upset about? Could be a variety of things, right? All the people with him covered their heads too and were weeping as they went on. Now David had been told, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. Ahithophel's a good one too.
Yeah, there you
That's a
go.
good name.
Woo.
So David prayed, Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. When David arrived at the summit where people used to worship God, there's a clue there, where people used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. So pretty pathetic but realistic sight. David is mourning what's happening here. So who's Hushai? A little bit later, verse 37, he's called David's confidant, or also it's translated as friend. So David's friend or his confidant. And it says there that when they meet, his clothes were torn, his head's full of dust. That is a symbol of mourning. It's also a symbol of bankruptcy, like just not being able to have any power over the situation. This is what Job did to express himself in his own grief. It's how he was described. So David immediately notices this with Hushai, that as David is weeping, as these people are weeping with him, Hushai is also sharing those same feelings as to the circumstance. And so it's not that this person brings any message or specific prayer to David. He was just there with the same emotions. And we need that in friends sometimes, right? When we experience loss or we experience a difficult circumstance, many times what we long for the most is not advice, no type of verbal expression, but more of the nonverbal, just being able to have someone present with you, feeling similar emotions to what you're feeling. So David notices this in Hushai, and then he gives him this task, a significant task. Verse 33, David said to him, if you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, Your Majesty, I will be your servant. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant. Then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Okay? So, let's figure out who Ahithophel is. He's listed as Absalom's new counsel. He's his right-hand man. And David is trying to counteract the bad advice that he knows Ahithophel is going to give him. So Hushai, David is suggesting that Hushai becomes David's spy. Pretends to be loyal to Absalom when he's actually loyal to David. So So the king is still being strategic, even in the midst of his misery and sadness. And actually, eventually, through these circumstances, through communication like this, Absalom will be overthrown. We'll see that. Let's talk about Shobi, Machir, and Barzillai. I like Barzillai.
Oh,
Baker? Yes, ma'am.
In verse 30,
Yeah.
when he's going up the Mount of Olives, is that like, so like, Jesus, I mean, is it like foretelling about Jesus?
You talking about because of the Mount of Olives?
Yeah, well, the Mount of Olives, and Jesus would have been barefoot.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly go right back through David's life and continually, this is what I oftentimes do when I'm preaching Old Testament stuff. I'm looking for parallels to Jesus and the gospel. And you'll see a lot of that kind of symbolism connect. And so, of course, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives on the night he was betrayed, right? That was right after they were in the upper room. They sang a hymn and they went up to the mount. You can see that connection there. So yeah, there's probably some type of symbolic connection that's there. I hadn't even thought deeply about too much. But if you went right back through David's story again and you tried to pick out, you would see a layer after layer of double meaning with these events that happen in David's life and what eventually happens with Jesus himself. So good insight on that. All right, so verse 27, and this is actual 2 Samuel chapter 17 is when we'll see these guys. So we've skipped a couple chapters over. So all of these, from 15 to 19, this is just detail about the conspiracy and how it plays out. But we're trying to emphasize these other people that surround David and the types of friends and relationships that we all need when it comes to dealing with difficult times in life. Verse 27, 2 Samuel 17. When David came to Mahanaim, I have no idea how to say that. Mayonnaise. Shobi, son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, son of Amiel from Lo-debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley, flour and roasted grain, beans and lentils. Now I'm hungry. Honey and curds, sheep and cheese from cow's milk for David and his people to eat. For they said, the people have become exhausted and hungry and thirsty in the wilderness. So Mahanaim is first mentioned actually in Genesis 32, verse 2. That's the name that Jacob gave to the place where angels came and ministered to him. Once again, you can see these layers of connection there between places in Scripture. 3 centuries later, angels come in the form of 3 men who will bring all the supplies that David and his people would need in the midst of this barren land, the wilderness. This kind of thing friends do. You don't have to tell them what you need, they perceive it, right? Maybe you've been bad in such a bad place where people ask you, what do you need? You can't even think of what to ask for. And the best friends are the ones that come around and say, okay, I know what you need. You're going to be quiet and let me help you with this, this, and this, and this. And that's the kind of people that these guys were for David and his people. So that's good. Rubber meets the road Christianity. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to develop more and more of through care groups that we have in this church, where you group people together based on insight that they have on your circumstance because they've been through something similar to what you're going through. And so that's what's happening here, this care that's taking place between these people. Shobi was from the sons of Ammon. David fought battles against Shobi's people, so this would potentially be someone who had formerly been an enemy, who's now made into a friend. Battles is a blank there. Machir was from Lo-debar. Does that sound familiar at all to anybody? Lo-debar means no pasture land. Barren place, no pasture land. Who came from Lo-debar? Who was hiding in Lo-debar? Mephibosheth, that's right. Mephibosheth was the guy with the bum leg or bum ankle who was dropped by the nurse, if you remember. And we talked about how great an illustration of grace that was, because Mephibosheth is Jonathan's son that David showed grace toward because of his love for Jonathan. Brought him to the actual family dinner table and brought him into the family of the king. Beautiful story. And lo and behold, you see this place, Lodabar, show up again because Maker was the guy that actually took Mephibosheth in his home for shelter. So that's how Mephibosheth ended up in Lodabar. So not only did Mephibosheth grow in his relationship, but also the guy who was kind of looking after Mephibosheth in Lodabar made this relationship, this connection with David through all of that as well, which comes back around to be a blessing to David later in life. So nice things you do earlier in life can come back around and help you out later in life as well. Barzillai, we find in the next chapter, is actually 80 years old. You think to yourself, well, 80 years old, you should be retired from having to do anything nice. But no.
Not back then.
No. Doesn't matter how old you are, you still are on the hook for trying to minister to people, be good friends, and help people out. God's still using you to serve in that way. So there's no remuneration, no applause, no big deal. It's just these people helping these friends out and saving lives as a result of that. All right. So later on, after a horrible series of events, David finds out that his son Absalom is dead. He's murdered. Okay?
Not good.
And this happened all before. See, David, what he's trying to do is get out of an emergency situation. Absalom's coming in with this chariot and these people and all this popularity stuff, and he's going to, if he has to, take the throne room by force. That's what David believes. So David's got to get out of Dodge, and then he's got to be able to reopen the conversation with Absalom to kind of talk to him about how foolish he's being. But even before he has opportunity to do that, Absalom ends up dead. So the news hits David between the eyes, and he takes it really hard. 2 Samuel 18:33. You see how he reacts. This description you'll see a few times in 2 Samuel, but 2 Samuel 18:33, the king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." This is a man who's crying out in sheer pain in losing this child who probably would have tried to kill David if he had the opportunity to do it. All right, so you thought David needed a friend then. He certainly needs one now. And then we see Joab step in. In 2 Samuel 19, we'll read through this section, verses 1 through 9, to see what Joab does to help David. Remember, Joab was his military commander, kind of his number 2 guy. So Joab was told, "The king is weeping and mourning for David, for Absalom, and for the whole army. The victory that day was turned into mourning, because on that day the troops heard it said, 'The king is grieving for his son.' The men stole into the city that day, as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle." So sneaking back into the people. And Joab saw Absalom's death as deliverance from God. Now they wanted David to get back on the throne where he belonged. But David is so wrapped up in personal grief, so you have a couple blanks there. They saw Absalom's death as deliverance from God. So it's now time for David to come back in Jerusalem, get back on the throne. David was so wrapped in personal grief, he didn't even think about what needed to be done next. So Joab confronted David to his face. David is in a fog of misery, and he needs someone to actually call him to reality, or else some bad stuff's going to happen politically for David. So Joab needed to be forceful, or he wouldn't even have been heard to David in the midst of the grief that he's in. And so this is how Joab handles it. Verse 4. The king covered his face, cried aloud, "O my son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son." Then Joab went into the house to the king and said, "Today you have humiliated all your men who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You've made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come on you from your youth till now." Joab does not mince words at all. He's not shy in telling David really what's about to happen. And Joab is just as true a friend as any of those other guys that were comforting him in the midst of his struggle as well. Joab is being a true friend by speaking the truth in love. He's not trying to hurt David with these words. He's trying to wake him up and get him moving in a very urgent situation. He's caring enough to confront David in this time. Would not be comfortable for anybody, much less a commander confronting a king. You'll remember Joab was there when David was making these decisions about Uriah. He was actually complicit in that command. And it seems that Joab has grown a little bit in his maturity that way in confronting David about this. So even though David's gripped by grief, David listened and he did what needed to be done to make sure that the problem didn't get any worse. And here's what happens. Verse 8, the king got up, took a seat in the gateway. When the men were told the king is sitting in the gateway, they all came before him. Meanwhile, the Israelites had fled to their homes. Okay, so David is now basically taking the throne back from all of this conspiracy that's happening. Okay, so this is basically, generally, the end of this long, dark period that David has gone through and having to face the consequences of sinful decisions that he's made. Not just with Bathsheba, but all along the way as a father to his kids and as a husband to these women that he collected, essentially. Yes?
Do you think Joab ever told him that he was part of the reason why Absalom was killed?
I don't know. It's hard to say. But yeah, Joab was involved. The whole conspiracy was a plot to put Absalom in a place where, he was going to either be killed by Joab's hand or something. God was going to intervene, and he certainly did. So I'll leave it to you guys to read how Absalom died. It's quite a fascinating situation. All that to say, I'm going to get a haircut later today. I've got an appointment, and I'm pretty excited about that. Because if you let your hair grow too long in a battle, that's trouble. All right, 4 truths about true friends before we're done. Number 1, first truth is this.
Oh, boy.
Friends are not optional, they are essential. You don't realize it in good times, many times, but it's important in those good times to invest in relationships because the bad times are coming, you're going to need them. Second thing, friends are not automatic, they must be cultivated. Cultivate friendships. That is work. It's a form of selflessness that you have to develop where you are willing to put your own needs and desires aside for a time to be there for someone else, and you'll see that every time that is returned. So Proverbs 18:24, one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Of course, that's a prophecy of Jesus. Third thing, friends are not neutral, they impact our lives. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character, and the flip of that is true as well. Good company can help us in our character. So who we choose to invest in, these relationships, are important. We have to choose carefully. We tend to attract who we are. So naturally, if we're just kind of hanging out with people that it's easiest for us to become friends with, they're likely going to have some of the same weaknesses that we have. some of the same strengths that we have. But when you have a variety of friends that you've intentionally invested in, you have differences from you, you'll find that sometimes it'll be their strengths that pick you up where you're the most weak. All right, friendships come in varying degrees. Some friendships will be more significant than others, and that's okay. There are all kinds of levels of friendship there. You can have acquaintances, you can have casual types of relationships with friends. You can also have close friendships, you can have intimate friendships. You see Jesus with several of these levels of relationships in his own ministry. And they're all equally important in your life. You can't have an equal number of all of them, though. So you will have more acquaintances than you'll have casual friends. You'll have more casual friends than you'll have close friends. You will have more close friends than you will have an intimate friend or two. So that's just something that you'll want to look at your life and think, okay, do I have those types of relationships in my life? Because they each serve a different purpose along the way. Yes, ma'am.
When I was looking for my stuff that I was going to present today, I came across this. I didn't use it, but it really goes with the lesson. When you have a friend that's going through a personal storm, instead of being a weatherman and spreading the news, try being an umbrella and cover them with love.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Isn't that nice?
And that's just right
Weatherman.
what you were talking about.
Umbrella. I like it. Yeah, and so it's just really neat how you can see the variety of friends that came along with David, and they each served a different type of purpose for his situation he was in. Didn't keep David from facing some really hard circumstances, but certainly helped him survive them. So that's good. All right, well, that's kind of what we're here for as well, to encourage one another, pray for one another, keep each other going through these days. So I don't see Jim here today, but if you see him, wish him a happy birthday. It's coming up pretty soon, before we meet next Wednesday. I'm not sure exactly what day of the week it is, but Jim Pearsall's birthday. When is his birthday?
The 6th.
The 6th. So that's going to be, was that Sunday? Monday? Next Monday. So good. We got people we can encourage along the way. Judy Fisher did not have a good visit to the doctor this past week. And it didn't seem to really get